Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, your curiosity, and, well, we dive deep to pull out the key knowledge fast. It's your shortcut to getting really informed. So today, you pointed us towards something pretty fascinating. Gerald Massey's Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World, Volume 1.
Right. And Massey himself thought this was his most important work, written in the light of day, he called it.
Yeah, he even seemed to hope it might get noticed overseas before people back home really got it.
Well, he did mention a conspiracy of silence around his earlier stuff in England, so yeah, maybe hoping for a better reception elsewhere for this one. It shows how new ideas sometimes struggle, doesn't it?
Totally. So our mission here is to unpack some of Massey's big ideas. We're looking at, the roots of mythology, of religion.
And specifically the role he gives to totemism and this huge influence he sees coming from ancient Egypt onto later belief.
Exactly. And prepare for some surprises, because Massey draws some connections that might make you go, huh. Like the idea that the first gods weren't human-shaped at all, they were animals.
Yeah.
And totemism, not just about tribes, but like an early sign language tied to things like puberty rites.
It's quite a different take.
And get this concepts we often link to much later religions. Massey traces them back to ancient Egypt. Okay, let's get into it. First up, this idea that divinity didn't start out looking human.
Yeah, this is pretty central for Massey. He argues that the earliest myth makers, they didn't picture nature's powers looking like people. No, they used animals, zoo types, he calls them, animal symbols to represent these big forces. It kind of flips the usual idea that we just made gods in our own image.
Right. Like force, you think human strength, maybe.
Yeah.
But Massey says no. In Egypt, force was the wind. It was Shu. And Shu's zoo type, the lion.
The lion, yeah. Well, think about the Nile crocodile. Powerful, dangerous, emerges from the water. Perhaps they saw an analogy there with the sun's power, life-giving but also potentially destructive, rising each day.
Okay, I can sort of see that. And the moon.
Similar thing,
Yeah.
represented by a hare, a frog, an ape, an ibis. You see these in the hieroglyphics. Massey believes these weren't random. They symbolized perceived qualities of the moon.
That's a whole different way of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when did the human-like figures show up?
That's the kicker. Massey points out that figures like her, the elder Horus, shown as a child, they appear relatively late in the game.
Late? That is surprising. Why does he think they waited so long? Why not just jump to human forms?
His perspective is quite striking. He suggests early humans were just, quote, too beggarly poor in possessions to dream of shaping the superhuman powers of nature in the human likeness.
Wow. So they lacked the concepts, maybe? Or even the art skills?
Maybe both. They used what was readily available, what they observed powerfully in nature, the animals. That was their symbolic vocabulary, you could say.
Okay, that makes a strange kind of sense. So animal gods first. Now, you mentioned totemism earlier. How does that connect? We usually think of totems as like tribal symbols, right?
We do, but Massey spins it differently. He sees totemism not primarily as a way to divide groups, but as a pre-existing, almost a sign language.
A sign language.
Yeah, a system of symbols, mostly animal symbols, that was already there before it got used to mark out different clans or whatever.
Okay, and what was the sign language for then?
Well, he highlights a really fundamental use marking female puberty. He brings in examples from Australian Aboriginal societies,
Right.
where a girl wasn't considered ready for marriage until a certain rite involving her totem was performed. The totem acted like a badge, signaling her status.
A badge signifying maturity.
Exactly. And he describes the totem here as symbolizing Earth's first blood. He connects mother totems directly with mother blood. It's linking the animal symbol to biology, to the continuation of the group.
Wow. Deep connection there. And the specific animals chosen as totems, were they just random?
He argues no. They had symbolic meanings based on observed traits, like the lion representing the chief, the beetle, the artisan, the ibis, the physician.
Wait, the ibis as the physician. How did that come about?
It's fascinating. Massey suggests it's because the ibis uses its long beak for, well, what looks like giving itself an enema.
It's seriously.
Yeah, and the Egyptians, maybe seeing this cleanliness-related action, linked it to healing and the physician's role.
That's amazing. Okay, and the jackal.
The jackal as the judge, again, probably based on observing its behavior, maybe it's scavenging, judging what's useful or not. It implies really close observation of the natural world.
Definitely. It's mapping animal behavior onto human roles.
And he even brings in this concept from the Arunta people, the Alcharinga. It's like a mythical dream time.
What's Aringa?
Yeah, a time before humans were fully human. Their ancestors were these sort of imperfect beings already linked to specific animal totems before they properly emerged as people with totem-based societies.
So the animal link comes first.
That's the idea. It reinforces that the symbolism predates the social structures we often associate it with. It definitely serves up those surprising perspectives you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Okay, shifting slightly.
Yeah.
Massey also talks about the very origin of religious symbols. And his starting point isn't quite what you might expect.
No, it's quite radical, really. He takes aim at the term phallic worship.
Right.
He argues that what's been called, that actually started with the symbolism of motherhood, the earth as the ultimate mother, the source of all life.
So not male-centric at all, initially.
Quite the opposite in his view. He uses really evocative images like the cave, not just shelter, but the womb of the earth mother.
The womb, okay.
Even a cleft in a rock, he says, was an early type representing the entrance to Mother Earth. The passage life comes through. It's about birth, not male procreation in this primary stage.
And how was this earth mother pictured?
Often by massive, fertile animal figures, like the pregnant water cow. Its sheer size represented the vastness of the earth, its capacity to bring forth life. It wasn't a human woman at first, but this immense, natural, life-giving force.
Embodied by an animal. It keeps coming back to that.
It does. And this connects to something widespread, doesn't it? This oval shape.
The oval.
Yeah. Massey points to it as this universal uterine symbol. You find it in cave dwellings, in burial sites, as a sign of rebirth.
Of birth, right.
Even later in architecture, think of the Vesica Pisces, or symbols in Freemasonry. He traces them back to this fundamental womb shape.
That is an aha moment. Seeing that potential common root for symbols across different places and times.
Exactly. The mother was the abode, the door of life, and this oval shape was its recurring sign.
Okay, so from the big picture of Mother Earth, what about the individual? What did the Egyptians believe happened after death? You mentioned transformation earlier.
Right. Massey talks about the soul's journey in the mysteries of Amenta, the underworld or afterlife. He calls it a form of metempsychosis reincarnation, essentially.
Like in Hinduism or Greek thought.
He suggests the Egyptian version was earlier, later adapted elsewhere, but in their view, the soul transformed, taking on the forms, the powers of those zoo types, the animal symbols of the nature powers.
So you become the symbols.
In a way, yes. You embody those powers on your journey. And then there's the Ka.
The Ka, the double. What exactly was that?
Massey clarifies it wasn't just like a ghost hanging around the tomb. It was a distinct spiritual likeness, different from the life soul you'd find in, say, an animal. It was uniquely human, in a sense.
And it needed sustenance.
Yes, that's key. People made offerings, food, drink, oils to the image of the Ka. They believed this sustained the spirit double in the afterlife. Its existence continued, and it needed nourishment.
Okay. And who guides you through this Amenta?
Horus plays a massive role. Massey presents Horus as the resurrected one, the one who successfully navigates Amenta. He manifests as the double, the Ka of the deceased, and acts as a kind of spirit medium or guide.
A complex picture of the afterlife.
Okay.
It definitely feeds that curiosity about what ancient people truly believed.
It gives a much richer understanding than just mummies and pyramids, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, let's pull back again. From the soul's journey to the whole cosmos. Massey looks at where astronomy and mythology meet, and he points, maybe unexpectedly, back to Africa.
That's right. He posits that the very dawn of watching the stars, of trying to understand the heavens, might have begun in what he calls the inner land of Africa, before dynastic Egypt even existed.
So the roots are even deeper, potentially.
Potentially, yes. He suggests the earliest intellectual light came from there.
And how did they map the sky? What did they see up there?
According to Massey, they saw reflections of earthly life and struggles. He uses Hydra, the giant constellation snake, and connects it to Apap, the Egyptian serpent of drought, a celestial monster representing a real terrestrial threat.
So the sky mirrors the Earth's dangers. What about, like, good versus evil?
That too. He points to this image from Hermopolis, a hawk fighting a serpent on the back of a hippo.
A hippo.
Yeah, because the hippo was a zoo type for Mother Earth floating in the waters of space. So the image shows the cosmic battle, light versus darkness, Horus the hawk against the serpent, happening right there on the world stage, you might say.
Wow. Okay. And paradise. Did they have a concept of heaven?
They did. Ru, the field of reeds, a lush place with the water of life. And Massey argues they located this paradise in the sky.
Where in the sky?
In the north, around the North Star, the circumpolar region that never sets. That was their heaven, their ultimate destination.
In the north. That is an aha moment.
Yeah.
You usually think of heaven as up, but locating it specifically in the unchanging north. That's interesting.
Indeed. The place of eternal rest, centered on that fixed point in the heavens. It links their ideal afterlife directly to their astronomical observations.
Right. Okay, so we're seeing Egyptian thought connecting animals, gods, the soul, the stars. Now, Massey goes a step further. He looks at the Hebrew Genesis.
Yes. And this is where we need to be clear. We're presenting his argument, not necessarily endorsing it as historical fact.
Absolutely. We're just reporting on Massey's perspective here. What's his take?
He argues that the Semitic creation stories, Genesis included, aren't original. He believes they're derived from that older Egyptian wisdom, that they predate the accepted timeline for the Mosaic texts.
Derived from Egypt? How so?
Well, he looks at Egyptian creator gods like Khepri or Osiris, but he notes their creations weren't initially about making the whole universe from scratch. It was often more focused on ordering things, especially within Amenta, the afterlife realm.
So different kind of creator.
A different focus, yeah. And he even suggests the idea of monotheism might have evolved from Egyptian concepts like unifying the powers of the Great Mother into one figure, later perhaps superseded by male gods like Ptah, who is seen as encompassing both male and female aspects.
A different path to monotheism than usually described. And he sees linguistic links, too.
He proposes some, yes. These are his interpretations. He links the Hebrew Elohim to Egyptian terms like Ali or Ari. He connects Pa, the opener, to the Hebrew word puth.
Interesting possibilities he's raising.
He also looks at dualities like the Egyptian father god Adam and the sun god Eu, and speculates about connections to later figures like Aya Jehovah or the concept of a Messiah.
Okay, so potential roots or parallels, according to Massey. Again, just presenting his view.
Exactly. It's about understanding his thesis, which connects these traditions in ways not commonly discussed.
Right, so creation stories. What about the fall? The idea of humanity falling from grace.
Massey tackles that too, and again offers a very different interpretation.
How so?
He views the Semitic story of the fall as a kind of misappropriated legend. He thinks it misunderstands the origin of evil. For Massey, evil wasn't about disobedience, but about natural hardships, thirst, hunger, darkness, predators, the challenges of existence.
So not a moral failing, but natural conditions.
That's his angle. And he contrasts the Egyptian idea, Horus rising in spirit, conquering death through transformation, with the Christian concept of vicarious atonement, where someone else pays the price.
So a different model of salvation.
Very different. He points to the Egyptian sacrificial figure, like child Horus, not as a payment for sin, but as a kind of voluntary offering, perhaps representing the cycle of life and death, not an expiation.
Highlighting fundamental theological differences as he saw them.
Precisely. The emphasis in the Egyptian model, per Massey, is on achieving resurrection yourself through the soul's journey and transformation.
Okay. One last major area. Paradise and the idea of a holy city like Jerusalem. How does Massey connect that back?
He again points to Egyptian origins, that celestial paradise we mentioned, Aru, or Mount Hetep, the ultimate home for the blessed.
Right, in the northern sky.
He suggests that the imagery used in later Hebrew texts, Psalms, Isaiah, Revelation, describing a heavenly Zion or Jerusalem, might actually stem from these older Egyptian descriptions of their celestial paradise.
So the language of heavenly Jerusalem has Egyptian echoes.
That's Massey's argument, and he adds a pretty provocative layer to it.
Go on.
He suggests that maybe the Jewish prophets took this vision of a celestial city, this heavenly ideal, and misinterpreted it or reapplied it as something attainable on earth, leading to a literal focus on the terrestrial city of Jerusalem.
Ah, so confusing the heavenly map with the earthly one, in a sense.
Kind of. He even plays with the name. He talks about two Jerusalems, earthly and heavenly, and suggests Jerusalem might even mean Aru-Salem.
Aru-Salem. The fields of peace, linking back to the Egyptian paradise.
That's the connection he draws. It reframes those prophecies through a very specific Egypt-centric lens.
Wow. Okay, quite a journey through Massey's ideas.
Yeah.
So let's try and sort of pull the main threads together as we wrap up.
Sure. We've touched on quite a bit. His core argument about gods starting as animals, the zoo types.
Right. Not human-like at first.
Right.
And totemism as this early sign language tied to life stages, especially female maturity.
And the idea that foundational religious symbolism comes from motherhood, from the Earth Mother, represented by the cave, the oval, the water cow.
Not from phallic worship initially, then the soul's journey in Amenta, the transformations, the Ka.
The potential African roots of astronomy, mapping the heavens based on earthly life and struggles, placing paradise in the north.
And finally, those really thought-provoking, though debatable, connections he makes between all this Egyptian wisdom and later traditions, like the Hebrew Genesis, the concept of the fall, and the imagery of Jerusalem.
It definitely offers a different lens, doesn't it? Challenges some common assumptions about where these ideas originated and how they evolved. Lots of those aha moments, or maybe, really moments.
Definitely food for thought. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Consider this. If we accept, even hypothetically, Massey's ideas about these ancient symbolic languages, the animal forms, the totems, the sky myths, how might that reshape how we look at symbols we see today?
Good question.
Are there other symbols we think are universal or have obvious meanings that might actually trace back to these very old, nature-based ways of thinking? Things hidden in plain sight, maybe.
It certainly makes you wonder about the deeper layers beneath familiar cultural narratives or icons. What unexpected origins might be lurking there?
Something to ponder. Maybe even delve into Massey or related sources yourself?
It's an invitation to look deeper, for sure.
Well, thank you for joining us on this particular deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.